Hello, my new best friend.
Hi, how's it going?
Oh, it's so much better now that we're talking in person, that I'm not sliding into your DMs like a creepy person. And
No, not creepy at all. Like you have made my life really with your incredible support and hype womaning it up. Like I just feel very, very lucky that the book world has brought us together, albeit with a different book, and that we've become friends. So it's
I'm
great to
so
be here.
excited. I'm blessed that you just called me your friend. I love it. Can you introduce yourself to everyone? Because we haven't even said
Yes.
your name yet.
I'm Hitha Palepu. I am a self-proclaimed multi-hyphenate. I'm the author of We're Speaking, The Life Lessons of Kamala Harris, How to Use Your Voice, Be Assertive, and Own Your Story. I'm also the CEO of Roshan Pharmaceuticals, a company developing injectable aspirin for hospital use.
So when I read your book, I didn't even know that multi hyphenate was a thing. And I went, oh, because I'm in this journey right now of writing down, what do I want? What don't I want? And I'm like, well, I like writing, and I like to be an author, and I like being a business owner, but I want it. And I went, oh, a multi hyphen. Oh, okay. But let me write that down, as that's what I can be. So thank you for that. I love it. And your book is so timely. I got to read this before Madam Vice President announced her running for president. And it was eye opening. I wish that I had read it when she was originally running, because we get to know Kamala on such a different level, and the truth. We get to learn the truth.
Well, thank you. I got approached to write this very specific book shortly after the election had been called in November 2020, and they had a really aggressive deadline in mind and getting it on shelves in less than a year. So I am grateful every day for my husband, truly my own Doug Emhoff, who was on a sabbatical at the time, taking a pause from his career in consulting and thinking about his next move. And he fully handled our kids, our parents in the middle of the pandemic with all the Zoom schooling and everything. So I could basically hunker down and write this book in about 3 months. And
So
I'm
who
so
called you
grateful.
and was like, you know what, Hitha, you write this book on Kamala? Because nobody has called me to say, you know what, go write this book on this big person.
It was my then editor, Marissa from Little Brown Spark. She sent me an email out of the blue and said, big fan of your first book and what you've done with your newsletter, Five Smart Reads, have really been enjoying your perspective on Kamala Harris. We are planning to do a book about her that's smart, serviceable, not full biography, not full self-development. Would you be interested in potentially writing it? And I was like, this is my dream book project. Oh my God. And I immediately forwarded it to my agent. We hopped on a call individually. We hopped on a call with the Spark team the following week. And I was writing a week after that.
That's amazing. That's a dream come true. That is, yeah. I wish that would happen, because it's a dream. It's amazing. But you followed Kamala for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and I love the story of you were on this journey as
Mm-hmm.
well, and you started listening to Kamala, and you're like, I'm going to write down all of her quotes that are really good.
Yes. I was at the beginning of my pharmaceutical career, a path that I gratefully and with such immense gratitude and respect have been able to follow my father in. So he gave me my first opportunity being a project manager at a company he had founded that was starting to grow and scale. So I jumped in, not really knowing anything and like figuring my way through. And so I also started a lifestyle blog at the time called Hitha on the Go, because I know myself well enough to know I need a creative outlet and I need something instant gratification because pharmaceutical development ate it. And
What?
I know. Who knew? So, as I was documenting how I was traveling, what I was packing, I got also a lot of questions about how do you dress for very conservative work environments. And that was something I had been struggling with, also being the only woman in a room, usually the youngest person in the room, one of the only people of color in a room. So many firsts. I also took me a while to find my confidence in those spaces too. And so by 2013, 2012, I still was in that, who am I in these spaces? And how do I present myself like with assertiveness and confidence, but also with the humility, knowing I still have a lot to learn from a lot of people. And that's a fine balance to strike. And I remember I was on a business trip. I was answering emails like on the bed, and CNN was on because it was just my consistent background noise that I could
Mhm.
get no matter where I went. And I remember looking up and seeing this woman who literally looked like she could be one of my older cousins, truly, striding towards a podium and start talking about the settlement she had negotiated for California taxpayers and homeowners from the Great Recession and the subprime mortgage fall. And I was like, that's Kamala Harris? Like, I, in my mind, assumed Kamala Harris was much older, super, super experienced. Like, I was expecting like gray hair in a suit, not like I could hang out with her and I want to hang out with her. And
Right.
I also need to know where that suit is from and like that hairstyle. And I just was like, who? Like, I need to know everything more about Kamala Harris. So I don't think I ever sent that email. I'm very sorry to the person. I doubt they're expecting it over 10 years later. But I really went on this sort of Google binge on learning everything I could about her, because in that moment, I remember seeing her. I go, this is the kind of role model I have been looking for. Someone who holds her own, someone who clearly feels confident and certain of herself, someone who is a phenomenal communicator. And these were all areas that I felt like I was struggling with in finding my own voice, my own style, my own confidence in many of the rooms I was in. And I started putting together this little doc in my notes app of Kamalaisms. So quotes that she said, different like outfit ideas of like suits and whatnot. And listen, I'm more of a dress and separates girl, not a suit girl. I like my hair pulled back instead of being down. And I certainly can be a little bit more flowery in how I speak and more descriptive. But I think studying her and being able to adapt what works for her and find things that worked for me helped me really find my confidence, my strength, and my own style, especially at work. And that was the time I started overseeing business development and negotiating our own licensing programs, et cetera. So I'm very grateful for her and helping me find my own blueprint of how to show up, how to speak up, and how to feel when I'm in rooms, whether they're very impressive, intimidating rooms or just rooms with my own family. So when I got approached to write this book, I was like, I've been really working on this book for over 10 years. So I think I can absolutely do this in 3 months. And even my own agent was just like, are you sure? Like your first book, like it took us a while to get into the rhythm of how to write a book. I go, no, Kim, like I can do this. And I sent her the doc and she goes, oh shit, you really have it.
Oh, you've been stalking her. No.
Fan. She's a
I'm a
mentor from
stalker. I'm a
afar.
stalker. It's okay. There's good
She has
stalking and
Secret
there's bad
Service
stalking.
detail. I can't say words like that. I don't want to end up on a list. No, very much have long time admired and respected and followed her from afar and followed her journey. And in so many ways, I'm so unsurprised that we are at this moment. For me, I really am like, oh, the rest of the country is finally caught up. Welcome. It's great
Welcome
here.
to my world. Yeah.
Welcome.
It's about fucking time.
Welcome to my manifestation. I have been thinking about this and I got to tell you something like really, really eerie. Election night 2016, sobbing, crying on the couch, chugging wine. And between like sniffling and sipping, I told my parents who were sitting on the couch with me, albeit had it way more together than I did. And I said, mark my words, 2020, it will be Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and they will have the exact same electoral college number that Trump had. And my parents look at me and they're just like, okay, sweetheart, like
you got some weird stuff.
whatever you got to say to get yourself through the next 4 years. And I'm like, just you wait. And as the primary started, and I was like, I saw her like peak and I was like, this is great. Then I saw her falter and I was like, Listen, it's both things. Like, you can have a campaign that may not be ready for a jungle primary, which 2020 for the Democrats absolutely was. I also think the press has a really hard time reporting women that isn't extremely caricaturistic or puts them into a box that they are very comfortable with, versus trying to push through and report accurately, with nuance and with the kind of respect that they give and afford men.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a both and. And everyone also thought I was an idiot for thinking Joe Biden would somehow make it through. And they're like, after Iowa, after New Hampshire, they're like, are you sure? I'm like, South Carolina is really where the primary starts. So when Biden like trounced everybody in South Carolina, I'm like, see? And then Super Tuesday, when he won like almost every single state, I said, see? And then it came to no surprise, but it came with much joy when he announced Kamala as his running mate. And then I am like, let's go. So I am weirdly prophetic about
Yeah, that's the
politics.
third thing you've told me, even off the air.
Yeah. And so when all this happened, in ways I was like, I think it could happen this way. Listen, I think Joe Biden has been one of the most successful and best presidents of my lifetime to have gotten as much done in the past 4 years that he has, both bipartisan and then muscling things through his own very diverse caucus. And his character and his humility,
Mm-hmm.
I have nothing but immense, immense respect and admiration for him and how he has served this country for such a long time. And the way he has, in many ways, been like a Lyndon Johnson and been the white guy who was not afraid to be the champion and be the first Black president's vice
Mm-hmm.
president, and potentially be the predecessor for the first woman president, as well as our second Black president, for South Asian president, like really the first multicultural president we'll have in our country's history, knock on wood. So I think we can't talk about Kamala Harris without talking about the Bidens, both Bo as her longtime friend when she was AG, and her, partner in governance and the person who really prepared her and got her to this moment, Joe Biden, and indirectly and directly, of course. I mean, she's phenomenal on her own, and she's also benefited and been supported and in turn supported this other incredible political family. So I just want to give Joe Biden his flowers, because I feel like he's not getting enough love and appreciation and acknowledgement for
Yes.
what he's done, both as president and stepping down.
He's so kind. He is.
Yeah.
I refer to him as Uncle Joe or Papa Joe. I'm like as if I know all these people on a first name basis. I'm like, yeah, they're like our family and our friends, because he's just so good.
Yeah.
He is a decent human being, something that we lack a lot of. I say that, and yet I want to take it back at the same time, because I feel like there's a lot more of us who are like-minded, but the noise is overshadowing all of that and overshadowing the kindness that truly needs to come to the forefront. He's a really good, decent human being.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been blessed to have a leader for 4 years who is kind, who stops to talk to people, who sees a child with a stutter and takes that time to say, I've been there too, and I get it. And it brings, I'm going to cry. It brings me to tears when, I'm now seeing like tweets of saying, let's not forget him. We need to thank him because he's stepping down. And that's got to be really, really tough. That has to be such a choice to say, you know what, I am going to sit back because I know that the betterment of our country is going to be passed on to Kamala.
And to step down to make sure he protected his successor and the vice president who stood by him, one who has she's had a hard job being number 2 without a clearly defined path, or to be given kind of the unwinnable jobs, is not easy. But I also think she took a lot of press hits. Like, she took so many hits. And I remember so many times reading these articles and being like, I learned way more about the person interviewing her than I am seeing reporting about what she is actually doing. And it frustrated me as someone who like really went deep on this person to write We're Speaking. I got extremely frustrated that I go, this isn't the Kamala that I have studied in detail and have a ton of verified research and reporting on. And it really pissed me off because I found ourselves like, I've seen this before. I hope we'll stop seeing it, but it's a really troubling pattern of how women in power are reported and portrayed on both sides of the aisle, because Nikki Haley went through something very similar in this past primary. And that is sort of the buildup where there's enthusiasm around this person, but it's still nascent and brewing. The sort of anointment whenever that person hits a certain milestone and it's incredibly favorable, flowery, giving the flowers, accomplishment, groundbreaking, etc. Like I think of the Vogue and the Elle covers right before the election and after the election. And then there's the teardown because it's easy, because it sells. And then there's the erasure where you purposefully don't report on this person. And then you toggle back and forth between teardown, erasure, teardown, erasure. So when people ask, well, where has Kamala been and what has she been doing? I go, she's been out there. You just haven't seen it because it doesn't fit in the business model of a lot of major media. And that has been, as a fan of hers, but also as a lifelong student of politics and a news nerd, extremely frustrating because I'm like, there's so much more that's happening here that isn't being reported because of a bottom line. Trump netted a lot of media companies record high profits during his presidency. Like you have to think about the business of media when you are consuming your news and thinking about where you're consuming the news from. And so when Kamala started to be the administration's champion on abortion access, starting from the Dobbs ruling onwards, when she was the first highest elected leader to go to an abortion clinic, the way she said abortion, 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 but also raised the issue and elevated the issue of maternal mortality, talking about gun violence prevention and the impact of gun violence in our communities, talking about voting rights. When you've let her prosecute the case on some of the massive injustices happening in the country, that's when she's at her best. She is also at her best when she's allowed to be joyful, when she's allowed to be herself. And so I've been so happy to see her like letting Kamala be Kamala since that announcement, since Biden announced he's stepping down, and the joy and the celebration and also the firmness. I mean, the way she handled the pro-Palestinian protesters at her rally in Detroit, which is a very stern, you have your right to speak, I'm speaking now, and then meeting with them privately afterwards to hear them and to hear their concerns, to share where she's currently at and where she wants to get to, I think and that last part doesn't get reported on nearly enough.
I was just going to say, because I read that this morning, it was a very quick morning with banana pancakes and first day of school, but I read that and I saw the video of, I'm speaking and
then
the
that
rest
Indian mom death glare. Like I have received that glare from my mom, and I'm pretty sure I've given that glare to my children. I was like, oh, that's Shyamalan auntie right there.
But the rest I didn't see reported. I did not see. And what I did see was, I want to say that somebody mentioned like Trump stopped whatever conference he was doing when this happened to him. It was like, you have a right. Let's hear you out. And, well, at least he listened. Well, obviously she took time out later and, went and had an actual discussion, not let me. I think there's also the difference of what happens behind closed doors later on that none of us know about versus what's performative and look at me and this is what I do and I'm doing it just so you can look at me.
Yeah, listen, I respect everyone's right to protest and demonstrate peacefully. I think it is one of the hallmarks of being an American and one of our rights that should always remain inalienable. And I'm also think a lot about what is the best way to achieve this thing I am fighting for? And it's not through protest alone. So I just sincerely hope those actions are also combined with letter writing and pressing your current elected officials in very specific manners, and to consider how you're talking to people too, because it's not necessarily the message, it's oftentimes the messenger,
Mm-hmm.
and thinking about how to have open and honest conversations that don't just end up in people screaming at each other because they don't feel heard, or they're just trying to get their point across and trying to force someone to accept their argument without really having a conversation about it. And I think we've seen right now that the loudest message is often the message that wins the news cycle. And while that might be great for clicks and revenue, it's not good for democracy. It's not good for humanity. So I will always value and respect the people who walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And when you really when you find the right accurate reporting, you will find that she walks the walk. And she's someone who doesn't like talking about herself or her specific accomplishments. She's focused on talking about the work,
Mm-hmm.
asking questions, learning more, and working relentlessly to advance change. And that is who she's been from when she was a district attorney and even before as a prosecutor to who she is now, how she's led as vice president, and how I believe she'll lead as president.
And I love that you bring up some of her record too, because now I'm seeing more and more of it, of people correcting that no, she didn't put thousands of Black men in jail for marijuana charges. It's so funny to me. It's like watching reality TV when they start questioning each other of, well, did you really say that? There's a fucking tape. Yes, go look at the tape. There's obviously a record of what she's done and what she didn't do. So
Mm-hmm.
let's look at it instead of making up these lies of what she didn't actually do when it's so negative.
Mm-hmm. And she's someone who showed that she's evolved on issues too.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the job as a DA and an AG is to prosecute. That is the job.
Mm-hmm.
But as she's advanced later in her career, she has made a lot of inroads with activists in the community to learn maybe some of the unintended consequences of the policy her office pushed forward, that you're not going to necessarily know everything. And the types of legislation she introduced specifically around criminal justice reform with bipartisan support in the Senate reflects an evolution of those issues. So I also think it's so important to look at this, did you just fall out of a coconut tree?
Right.
You have to consider what has happened in the overall context and stop cherry picking very specific details, putting them out of context because they fit your narrative. Like I think we've lost the ability to think critically in many ways. And, my husband and I talk about this often. Like before we became parents, we were like, oh, our kids are going to be brilliant at math and they're going to eat everything and we're never going to watch TV. My kids definitely ate chicken nuggets for like the 8th time in the past week. Roe hates double and triple digit multiplication. And I am working with the balance of we need to have a growth mindset and push through hard things. And we could do this to just take a break. And then they're definitely watching TV right now. I'm sure they're watching something extremely engaging that's going to have them jumping off the walls even more. It is what it is. But my most important thing is I want them to learn how to critically think. I don't want them to accept. So when I say something and they're like, but why? I have to remind myself in the moment that as annoying as this is exactly what I want them to do. It's like they want to know what the impact of them sitting down and eating lunch or the impact of them doing a math worksheet is. Granted, I wish they would just go with it a little bit faster and more, but we're not going to win everything.
Right.
We're not going to win everything. So that's something when I was researching and writing the book, it was, hey, everything that's ever been negatively portrayed about her or her record, let me go deeper in and really study it. We're human. We all make mistakes. There are some things I don't agree with her on. I'm not a blind fan, a blind follower who's just going to accept everything. I certainly have my disagreements on certain positions she's taken on issues or things she has championed in policy that, looking back now, I'm like, this did not have the impact it was intended to. And I've also seen her evolve on many, many things. So I think it's really important we stop holding, especially women, especially Black women, to a level of perfection we never demand from white men.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to call that, to raise awareness to it. I also think necessarily calling things out if there isn't like an intended follow-up action in a way you want to move people. I like to use the term raise awareness, because I like to give people the benefit of the doubt that they genuinely did not properly understand or were aware of a certain perspective.
That's your kindness showing through. Sometimes I just, I'm like, no.
I mean, I've definitely yelled at my children like at least 5 times today when I was on calls and they were barging through. But, you know, motherhood in the summertime,
It's a
we
grand
all have
thing.
our limits.
How old are your kids now?
They are 9 and 5. So
Okay.
4th grade, going into 4th grade and kindergarten.
So we're just went into 4th and 3rd. Do you involve, Ro is the 4th grader, right? Do you
Yes.
involve Ro in any of these conversations?
Yes, I can actually talk about an experience they had at a new summer camp, which
Oh, yes. This
we're
is
in
good.
Pennsylvania, in Bucks County, which is very much a purple district. And I happen to have signed them up for a camp where there are a lot, mostly Republicans, Trump's very, very passionate Trump supporters. And Ro, one day, he was just reading his Kindle quietly. He knew he needed like to tap out of the activity. His counselors were supportive. It was like, when you need a minute, bud, go ahead and take it. So he was just reading on his Kindle. And a boy came up to him and said, "Why are you reading? Boys play video games and only girls read." And Ro looked up at him and said, "That's a weird thing to say. Why are you being weird?" And like went back and started reading his Kindle. So one, thank you, Tim Walz. Actually, thank you, George W. Bush, for calling this all weird back in January 2017. But then Tim Walz for re-weirding everything. And then it also was like, this may not be the best fit for our family. So let's come up with a plan and pull you out and let you have just a normal kid summer. Now that they are home and not in camp, I am like, we are writing postcards. We are signing up to volunteer. You are not just going to sit around and do nothing. Like we have our little school prep work. We have our activism work, and then you can go play and watch TV and do whatever you need to do. So Rocky too, even though he's only 5, he can color a postcard. He can write his name. He can have a conversation about, this is an election. Do you know what an election is? My kids are annoyed that I make them watch a lot of Schoolhouse Rock, but I'm just also like, listen, thank you, Disney Plus. And 2, you need to learn these lessons. I will not have a child not knowing what the role of the executive branch, the role of the legislative branch, and what the role of the judicial branch is. And like, you need to know this. You are a citizen. Like, we practice citizenship. It's an action. It's a regular action in our household. It is not a state of being.
I love that. We started, it's been at least 3 years ago when our council member ran for mayor. And we canvassed. They've canvassed. They know that I do postcards. They couldn't really write at the time. And they've been to election night parties. Like, it's very rare that we will ever be invited to an election night party for a mayor of 1 million people. So we will go every year he invites us. But they know. And I think it's so important that they do know, because they're going to be 18 and voting here in a hot second. And if they don't know how important it is, then we're in trouble. And, you know, everything that we're voting on right now is for their future. It affects them. And that it really baffles me, especially when you look at different people. I mean, it's across the board that there are people who are voting just single-mindedly, like, this, how does this affect me? Well, how does it affect your children? How does it affect your grandchildren, your cousins, your aunts, your uncles, your neighbors? There's so much more that it needs to be. I love that was Tim Walz who just said, you know, like, what was it? He just said something about whatever happens like to you, it's like none of my business.
Yeah, that's a golden rule of the Midwest.
it's like none of this is anybody's business, you
Mhm.
know, like, and I don't feel that your religious belief should be what's affecting the rest of us. Good for you. If this is what you believe, this is what you choose, then that is you. But it's not up to me to make sure that my neighbor's making the right decision to ensure that they go to the heaven that I think is existing.
And I think, especially when it comes to reproductive freedom and specifically how restricting abortion care affects like obstetric care as a whole, this narrative that abortion seems to be an elective choice for people who only wish to terminate an unwanted pregnancy is false.
Hmm.
I needed an abortion to manage a miscarriage, and I needed a second one to address complications that could have killed me. And at the time, Roe was still law. And I was in Pennsylvania and in New York where I could get that care immediately. I could have died if I were in Texas and this happened post ops. I could have died in Montana. I would have died in more states of the country than the states I would have been safe in. And that needs to be the conversation, is that what is a convenient, what fits someone's narrative and fails to address the actual reality is something we need to question, because when people realize how dangerous these quote unquote bans are, they're just killing women. They're just
Hmm.
killing people. And it has nothing to do with life. It really has everything to do with control and weakening.
Yeah. And I'm the same way. I had my first was a miscarriage, so I had to go in for a DNC. And it was weeks later because my body didn't know what to do. And if you leave an unborn child in you who's just you, something is going to happen to you. And that
Mhm.
is why there are these procedures so that we can live and that our bodies don't get infections and shut down and whatnot. And I mean, this talk of post birth abortions, like, though, what?
It's
And
not a
these,
thing. Partial
it's
birth
not a thing.
abortion is not a medical term. None of these terms that sound official and scary happen in clinical care. They just don't happen. The rare times someone would need an abortion in a second or third trimester is a heartbreaking moment, because at that point you have a list of names for your
Mhm.
child. You've started decorating and planning for a room. You've started buying things for them. You're envisioning them in your family. No one gets to 25 weeks pregnant and decides, you know what, I don't really want to be pregnant anymore. So
Oops.
let's not do this. It is to do with life of the mother, a stillbirth, the most heartbreaking moments anyone could face. And to add additional trauma to force a birth or to deny life-saving care at the moment they need it, not when it is on death's door, is an atrocity. And I think that's what people need to get their heads away from, these very narrowly defined terms that are going to scare you, and instead look at the reality.
I couldn't agree more. I'm like, yep, yes,
and
I agree.
and like I think the vice president has been the most senior person in our country's history who has addressed these issues on an offense, not on defense. And I think Tim Walz being one of the few men talking about the care economy and the need for accessible and affordable childcare, who's done something about it and treated it as the major economic issue it is, and not relegating it or minimizing it to a women's issue, makes me so excited for this ticket. His legislative and governing track record on these issues is outstanding. And these are truly the true pro-life policies, because it
Mm.
is about the quality of life and the dignity of the life you're affording people, not mere survival.
I love the way you put that. I love it. And I adore him because, and I did not know Tim Walz before all of this. I love Minnesota. I have some clients from Minnesota, and Minnesotans are the best, don't you
They
know?
really are the
I lived in the
best.
Midwest for a while, and I covered Minnesota, and I was like, these Midwesterners are just the kindest people there are.
If I could
Uh,
handle that winter, like I'd live in Minnesota in a heartbeat. I am too weak.
it was 6 months of snow on the ground in Chicago, and I was like, yeah, okay, take me back to California because I wear flip flops year round, so that wasn't really convenient. Uh, what I love about him is he brings it's like our mayor here talks about common sense and how there's such a lack of it. And Tim Walz has the common sense. He's a gun owner who's for common sense gun laws.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've volunteered with Moms Demand Action, and I'm like, yeah, you can own a gun. There's no
Yeah.
problem with that. That is not a problem.
I don't want to
It's
take
all the
away your gun.
yes.
I
So
just want to
stop with
make
the
sure.
Second Amendment right
Yeah.
bullshit.
Again, extremely like blowing out of proportion one part of a larger policy or even a larger rule. Like it pisses me off that we haven't adequately funded the ATF, the bureau that regulates ammunitions, tobacco, and firearms. Is that it?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Adequately to uphold the laws we already have on the books. The fact that their database is still completely on paper, not digitized, that for under now a number of presidents, we have failed to appoint and approve through Senate, give Senate confirmation to a director from like the Obama years. It's by design. It's not by accident. And it's not a two-party issue. It's a one-party issue who will rather strike fear and stoke hatred versus, for the most part, work together to like find ways we can make things better for as many people as possible.
Yeah.
And so I can't control their actions. I can't control what they do, but I can do what I can, which is have hard conversations, be willing to listen, but also temper my own passions to speak clearly and as honestly and as factually as possible, to know when to leave those conversations be and quietly say, I'm glad we had this dialogue. It's not about changing either one's point of view, but presenting new information. I'm grateful for the information you presented me. Let's talk about baseball. And to practice citizenship and remember that the rights we have were fought for against a tyrannical empire. And granted, we have the formation of this country and who we displaced and killed and created great harm to is something we also need to reckon with. However, I think a lot about the fact that we fought for these rights over and over and over again. And for such a young country, we have accomplished so much. It's not about resting on our laurels or accepting what is. I really do believe in George H.W. Bush's vision of being a shining city on a hill. And we've never really gotten there, but it's about getting closer with every little action we take. I talk a lot in We're Speaking about my parents and my family's American journey. And my uncle has a very similar story to Shamala Gopalan Harris in that he came to this country when there was only 100 visas allowed for Indians to come to the United States to study or work. He was one of those lucky people who got it by being a Fulbright scholar. Shamala got it as part of her acceptance into Berkeley to study nutrition science and then endocrinology. Because my uncle was able to come here and teach chemistry at Rutgers and bring his own family members here, my aunt came here as part of a really rough marriage. Only in America could she have left her husband, been able to work really hard to become a real estate agent and support her son, who is now a Fortune 100 CEO. That my dad could come here. He pushed through in India, not being able to have impaired vision, couldn't hear out of one ear and had very minimal hearing in another. Get through IIT Bombay to get his master's in chemistry. Come here, finally get a hearing aid, start as a bench chemist at Pfizer, which you could get with a high school degree, not necessarily what a master's in chemistry would get, and work his way up the pharmaceutical industry to develop hundreds of life-saving medications. And then when he should have been retiring, decides to become an entrepreneur. My mother was the first entrepreneur in our family, and the way she built businesses while handling our many, many moves, making sure my dad and I's lives was smooth sailing, like it was like magic. And the way she now shows up and practices citizenship with me, with my kids, and on her own, and galvanizing the community at the temple she attends. These are American stories that don't often be viewed as American stories. There's always that it's an Indian American story. It's always sort of in being defined in a very specific way. I think sometimes it gets minimized of we too sing America. And so in the book, it was really, really important for me to make this point of these stories, like Shamala Gopal's Harris's story is an American story.
Mm-hmm.
Kamala Harris's story is an American story. My parents and my family's American story is an American story. And my story is an American story. It is not just an Indian American story. It is not just a South Asian American story. It is not just a Black American story. It's an American story. And I hope people, in widening their perspective and maybe hearing this, start to see where there are American stories that they might have otherwise appended in some way to put into a space that maybe made them feel more comfortable, but unintentionally minimized those stories.
I love that. That was perfect. That was beautiful. Damn, you're good.
Thank you.
I love it. And everything that is in this book, and it tells your story as much as it tells Kamala's story. And I truly, when I say that I think everybody should read it, I feel that way because we need to hear these stories. And especially as, I don't want to jinx it, but from my lips to someone's ears, we need to learn everything we can about our next president and the truth. And, to recognize all of her accomplishments and the person that she is. And it's so amazing that you wrote this book. Oh, I do want to ask about getting to meet her.
Yes. I am incredibly lucky that I've gotten to meet her twice. The first was one of her very last campaign events when she was still running for president, November 2019. I got to meet Stacey Abrams earlier that day. So that was just like
the mother load.
one of the greatest days of my life. And then the next was during the White House's AANHPI forum last spring, that I was invited to attend a photo line and get my photo taken with her and just share a few short words. I didn't get to speak to her too much the second time, but in the first time, I had an opportunity to attend an even smaller private reception beforehand and actually have a conversation. I mean, those pictures are on my Instagram feed where I got a hug from her and I'm like, this is the best day of my life. It's not that she makes everyone she meets feel important. She treats every person she meets as the most important person in the room. She asks your name. She makes sure she's pronouncing it properly. She'll ask what the meaning is of it. She'll ask about your family. She will ask you what you care about. She will ask all the questions and she'll remember them. And it is how I hope I can make everyone I come in contact with feel when I'm not having a bad day, because when I'm having a bad day, I just apologize to everyone that it comes in contact with me. She's special. There's no other way to say it, but I feel like the moment has finally met the person, and the things we could achieve as a country, as humanity, under a Harris-Walz presidency will be incredible and healing, I hope, for us all.
I think as you say that, I feel like, maybe we need to get through what we went through to appreciate what is going to come.
I have the enthusiasm of 2008 with the battle scars of 2016. So I'm coming in it with excitement, but with also not taking anything for granted about this election.
Yeah. I appreciate you so much. I'm so glad we're friends now.
Me too. Thank you
And I'm so
so
grateful you
much.
wrote this.
Thank you.
I'm really grateful. And it came into my life at the most perfect time. So not expected. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
she wasn't even running yet. And I went, oh, I'm going to get this book and I'm going to support my friend Hitha. And oh, it's really good. Oh, good. Now I know everything there is to know.
I think I can be a little like snarky. So whenever I did gift guides the past couple of years, I had a list of things to buy, snarky gifts to give people who annoy you. And so this book is for your MAGA family member, and How to Pack is for the most disorganized person in your life.
I'm going to need to buy more copies because they're coming out of the woodwork.
I mean,
I'm
I
going to
will
leave them on
say,
doorsteps.
no, I will say some of the best compliments I've gotten about this book have been from the conservative people in my life who really said, I had no idea about any of these things, and say, listen, I categorically still disagree with her on policy, but I have a greater respect for her as a person. And I'm like, that's cool.
Yeah, if anything, that's huge because there's kindness and respect is lacking and we need
Mm-hmm.
more of that. So you are literally changing the world with your words. If that is what people are coming away with, then that's amazing.
I need like a clip of that, of this, like what you just said. So whenever I'm having a bad day, I could just replay it.
We can do that. I'll send you a voice memo too. You can just replay my voice saying that
Thank
to you
you.
over and over.
Thank you. I need it. And we all
We're,
need it. We
we
all need
do.
these. We all need our little
Yes.
hype files to keep us going in the hard moments,
Oh,
which
I
is in
will
the
hype
book.
you every day, all day long. I am your hype person forever.
Back at you.
Can you share with everyone where they can find you, where they can buy the book,
Yes.
follow you?
Yes, there's a limited number of hardcovers still available exclusively at Barnes & Noble. The paperback is now available on Amazon. And if you buy lots of copies, I will get to write an updated version when she becomes the next president of the United States. So please, please, please buy multiple, share that, give it to everybody. Makes a great gift. And you can find me on Instagram at Hitha Palepu, same on Threads. Those are the two platforms I am the most engaged, or on my Substack, which is hitha.substack.com.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you.